You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. On episode 350, who better to help celebrate this milestone than the one and only Paul Sinclair? Paul updates us with some new cases that he's been investigating, witnesses he's interviewed, and some of the new documentaries that he's working on that will be coming soon. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/Mysteries and Monsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. Thank you to my latest patrons, Patricia, Samantha, and Lee. And thank you to each and every one of you that support me and the show with your contributions. It is greatly appreciated. Mysteries and Monsters can be found across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for episodes and news, and our exclusive merchandise is via TeePublic, and you can find the link for that in the show notes as well. Our intro and outro music is performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork, and the show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. So, without further ado, after 2 years, let's welcome back Paul Sinclair. It's a very warm welcome back to our good friend Paul Sinclair as he continues to be a conduit for reports of strange phenomena. With a hectic schedule of filming, live shows and witness account videos, Paul continues to examine the unusual. Paul, welcome back, my old mate.
Thank you very much, and I'll not forget anybody's name today because it's two Pauls. It's easy and it's great to be back, and we always have some great discussions sort of on these podcasts and off air, so it's really good. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's been a crazy 18 months, I would imagine, Paul, since Wolflands came out, and your channel's continued to grow. You've had some of the great and the good of strange phenomena on recently. I know you had a big chat with Ron Moorhead the other day.
I did. We tried Ron probably 6 or 7 months prior to that, but his internet were terrible. He's sort of, it's a bit weird saying a hero of mine, but I just loved the opportunity to speak with Ron Moorhead, because anybody familiar with the unexplained, and particularly with cryptids, will know that his name is kind of the benchmark, because he speaks sense when it comes to the subject of cryptids and unexplained phenomena. Might not be what you want to subscribe to, not you personally, but some people, but at least you come away thinking, yeah, this guy's got something to say. So it was great to speak with Ron. Because everybody's take on the subject of unexplained phenomena as a whole is all slightly different. We've all got different reasons for being in it. Some of us just do it for money, or the potential for monetary gain. Some of us are doing it because we have a genuine passion for it. Well, I'm not making a lot of money, so I really aren't. But, I recently did a bit of work for Ancient Aliens, and they've asked me many times. So, and that's where, I won't say the money is, but if you want to make a bit of money, there's a bit of money there. But, so I'd sort of not refrained because of that, just because I did. That was just circumstance. But it's non-stop, Paul, and I know you work hard for a living and you're doing this as well. But I'm getting up at, I don't know, my wife probably bring a cup of tea in a minute, and she'll, if I put her on the spot, she'll probably say what you on about. But she knows I'm up at in between 4:30 and 5:30. Just answering emails and replying to people and trying to get things in folders that kind of, I don't know, fit with other accounts. And it's difficult because there's so much information. Last week, I interviewed a lady who'd seen something strange in Dyke. I mean, I think you've been to Dyke, Paul, haven't you? So she'd got this story of her and a friend having an evening walk that turned into the night time, and they got back to their car, which were facing the little bit of woodland down into that grassy bank. So opening in trees, put the lights on and sees an unusual animal, like a huge wolf, she said, on all fours, but long with bright orangey red eyes. But where am I going with this? As we're walking round and she's telling me this story, because I picked her up from her home and we were walking round it, a vehicle pulls up alongside of us as we're walking up the little single-track road going in, and it's a guy that, are you Paul? Yeah. Well, yeah, I am. Yeah. Paul, he said, I emailed you, I don't know, probably 18 months, 2 years ago. about something I saw in the Dyke. I'd like to tell you about it. And it just come down that day. So the chances of that were odd. But also it makes me realise that I need to categorise, I need to document everything, because I'd forgot. As soon as he told me about what he'd seen and experienced, instantly knew, but I thought, that's slipped through net. And it tied in, because he saw this thing on October the 19th, 2019. So I got that email, and probably I've got loads of other emails, and if somebody's give you a good account of something, I'll put it into a Word document and I'll write it, I'll copy it, paste it, write it up, and if they want it reading out or doing in their words, I'll leave it at that. But if they want me to make a job of it, I'll change all these, and I just change it all around, not alter the facts. But I'd missed that one. And it really was an important one, because on October the 20th, 2019, there's another report from Danes Dyke that I'd got. There were one on October the 20th, 2019, and there were one on October the 20th, 2020. So we've got a month, and we've a pattern forming. Too much of a coincidence that this man's experience and sighting, it was literally hours before, potentially not even 24 hours before. Do you know what I mean? So to me, there's something unusual there. So we got this lady's account. She's been for a walk down to the beach. It's not quite dark. They've walked back towards the car park, cut across a little bit of a meadow. She says if we'd have walked through the woodland, we'd have bumped into this thing, on the trail that they were going. She says, but we didn't. We cut across this little bit of meadow because we're not familiar with woodland. They've only just moved to area, not recently. And got in the car. No odd feelings, no odd noises. Put the car headlights on, and there it is, in between some trees, a gap in trees, just looking at them. It weren't at first. She says it just looked like an elongated wolf. She says, oh, thank you. Hold on, one sec. We'll put this to the test. You don't have to come on camera. What time do I get up in the morning answering emails?
4:30.
Well, that weren't planned, guys. But, yeah, thanks, Mary.
Sure, I saw a fibre change hands there, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely, tenner really. But, so she said this thing then turned. There were no suggestion of mind speak or anything like that. She said, but it were almost as though it were, there, you've seen something. You wanted to see something. You've seen something. She says, and it just stared at us. And then he moved away into the tree line, and a friend, she didn't see this, said that the eyes, the bright orange eyes, he could see them as it went into the tree line. These weren't self-illuminating eyes. The car headlights had hit this, because some reports talk about these self-illuminating eyes. So that's why I was there with this lady. And then, so what are the chances? I'm walking around with this lady. She's retelling this strange experience, sighting that she's had. And another guy pulls up in a van with his wife. Can I speak to you? And he's got a story, one that slipped through the net. But it gets even more bizarre. This guy still lives up north, and this lady's moved from up that area. They didn't know each other, do you know what I mean? But it's just, you think sometimes some things are just too perfect.
Yeah.
And then we've got the other reports. So we know that October is a month that is worth observing if you want to look at the cryptid phenomena around that area. I mean, we did it a few years ago because in the Truth Proof chat, I spoke about this a few days ago. And a lady in chat, Jo, well, it comes over as Jojo, she used to live on the road, I think it was called Lighthouse Road, that looked over onto Danes Dyke. I might have got road wrong, but there's a road that looks over onto Danes Dyke. And she noted that in those months, and she'd told me, she'd emailed me before, they've had the bedroom windows open or slightly ajar, and there's an ungodly howling and screaming coming from the woodlands. And she mentioned it in chat, the Truth Proof chat, and it's easy to say only a few days ago because it's not going to correspond with your listeners, that you'd have to just find it, and I don't know where you'd find it. It's just on a Truth Proof live stream from Sunday. And once again, it's tying in. There's something there. I mean, we walked round in October in the darkness. We've walked round the woodland. Maybe we should be careful what we're looking for, really, but we did. But for the most part, I don't think these things are hurting anybody, do they? And we don't even know if there's the substance, do we? We don't know that there's some kind of, you could knock on them and they'd make a noise. We really don't know that. It's hard to know what these things are getting, or whether they're just as confused as what the person watching them are, you know, if we are to deal with things that allegedly are from some other sphere of existence that's running parallel to our own, who's to say that these things aren't as shocked or confused by what they're looking at as what we are? It's difficult, isn't it?
It is, because I think obviously you'll know this better than most, Paul. The majority of experiences that I've heard you share, either on the documentary or on other interviews you've done or through the live stream or the little videos that you do from time to time, there is always this kind of suggestion that when people are seeing strange things, there is this sort of space that's always between them, that at the end of the day, if we're talking about large creatures of any form, if something fancies having a nibble, it'll come over, Paul, and there's not much we can do about it. We can see that.
They don't seem to want to, do they? They don't. It's funny you should say this, because this morning I've been looking at a bit of footage that I took of the guys who were in the forest in North Yorkshire, the three men. Some footage that's never been played, and one of them came through to see me. He were off visiting somewhere, and he were a train stop. Didn't cost him any more, and he stopped, and we had a couple of hours. I sat in Bottom at Garden, and I interviewed him again about what he'd seen in and around Broxer Forest with Steve and the other guy who didn't want to be named. And I've just been listening to it, and you're right. It's fitting what you've just said, because he didn't. Although he were terrified by what he were looking at, and they didn't even want to look at it after a while, because what the visual was just so frightening. But he also says, on reflection, he doesn't think it wanted to hurt them, because if it did, it could have done. You know, quite easily, this monstrous thing, and that's all you can call it, stood watching them in the darkness with self-illuminating eyes. Could have hurt them at any time if it had wanted. But that were his reflections of it. And you know, the other witness, I don't know what your listeners know about Wolflands, and this is one of the witnesses from Wolflands. The witness that wouldn't allow us to interview him, he perceived it before it even appeared. He knew it were there. He were asking the other two guys to leave. So they were definitely laying its influence, its essence, its presence onto that man, that individual. You know, he was aware of it. He said, and like Jim said, as I've just listened to that interview now, he says, you know, we'd driven a long way to get there, you know, 140 miles. We'd gone down into this deep ravine. It was dark. We got down getting dark. We got down, set us camp up. We got down about 8 p.m. and we couldn't leave. He says, it were hard getting down there, getting back up in the darkness. He says, I'd only ever been to it once or twice before in the daytime. He said it were impossible. He looks for locations, and he'd found this location on OS Maps or Google Earth. And, that's their experience. But it's this awareness. And are they actually there, Paul? Is there something... you know, there's so many things that conflict in my mind and other people's minds, because you speak to some people and say, oh, yeah, they're physical. Speak to Native American Indians. They'll tell you that when they're in our sphere of existence, they believe that these things can be killed, these things have to eat, they've got to adhere to the laws of physics as we would. But their ability is to slip in and out. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. But there's something to it. Some people would say that they're almost ghosts. You know, with this ability to just disappear and appear at will. There's definitely a physical to the one that Jimmy, Steve, and the other guy saw, because they thought at some point, and I never thought we were going to talk about this today, to be honest, Paul. But it's just they thought at some point it was growling at them. Early on into this observation, but then they realised it was its breathing. It was so guttural and deep and powerful. So that implies a physical, you know. And I throw everything at them. Are you sure it weren't a cow or a horse? You know, in the darkness, you look. They said the moon were up, and they could see the silhouette of it. So it's on two legs. We can see arms, we can see shoulders, we can see ears that look so ridiculous they look cartoonish. You know, it's just. And when it turned its head, they said it looked cartoonish, like Wile E. Coyote. Yeah. Just crazy. But, you know, I mean, that's a story of... There's loads more come in between times, but it's one that's it'll forever capture my attention, because when you go into that little bit of woodland. It is old. It's old, ancient woodland because the logging machines, I'm not saying they'll never get in because they're designing all sorts of things to get trees on steep bankings and everything, but it's old. It's old woodland that's not been touched. So it's interesting. And then this stuff at Bempton. Sorry, Paul, you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, obviously, that's a favourite report of mine as well, Paul, primarily because the location is so arduous that you can instantly rule out the possibility of somebody pranking them. I mean, why you would do that anyway, on the random off chance that some men might be just camping in a weird ravine at night, is pushing the bounds of credulity, I think.
Yeah, so something tells me, and I don't quote me on this, guys, if you read Truth Proof afterwards and say you got the date wrong, but something tells me it was late August 2018 that this occurred. And like you said, the ravine is 700 feet and it's steep, really steep. For example, we know Les isn't fit, but he'll not mind me saying this, he collapsed when we got to the top of ravine. Because these guys, this is how genuine these guys are. They drove from Rotherham up to North Yorkshire straight after work just to go into the forest with us and show us where they'd seen it. This is before we even stayed in the forest or did anything with them. And you don't do that if you've not had some kind of wild and wacky experience. And, when Steve first contacted me, the emotion, this guy was pouring out after seeing it. It really bothered him. I mean, Jim said there, you miss things, because I've not listened to interview probably for 2 years, and I've just listened to it today. Not because I'm coming on here, because I'm going to put it out on Truth Proof and add some forest images rather than just sat in bottom of my garden talking to him and recording it. And you miss so much, because he said he had a lot of trouble sleeping. He laid in bed for hours and hours and hours on a night because he'd no interest in this. They liked wild camping and fishing. And they'd go out. Steve and Jim have been friends from young boys, up to, fully grown adults, and that's what they've always done. And they liked the wild camping and fishing. Because I said to him, do you think before you'd seen that, if somebody say we'd have bumped into you in that forest and said, well, we're in here because there's been a report of something that people would describe as a werewolf or a dog man. I said, what would you have said? He said, I'd have just laughed at you. I'd have thought, I think his words were, I'd have been thinking, what you been taking? What drugs have you taken? So, it really does make you think. And to anybody, and this goes across the board, the full spectrum of unexplained phenomena, to anybody that says I don't believe in any of this, to me, seeing is believing, I'd say to you, I can respect that, because this subject and the things that people are seeing and experiencing is off the scale. How do you explain something that just shouldn't be? It's so difficult, isn't it? You can relay these stories, but you realise that some people, unless they see it, are never, ever going to believe it. And I can respect that. What kind of gets on people's nerves who've told a personal experience or an incredible story is when they just look at you and just then shout the mates and listen to what he's got to say or she's got to say. Tell them, and they're just laughing and it's just a joke to them. And we know that is the reaction of quite a lot of people, but it's a shame. And I think things are changing. I think the mood towards people who are sharing these experiences, not necessarily the cryptid ones, but especially the UFO ones, as becoming more accepting of the reality, due to why they need a government to tell them it's real, why they need somebody in authority to tell them it's real. It's almost like they need schooling. It must be real because somebody in authority's told us. And if that's what it needs, then that's fair. I'm not going to argue with it, but I don't know why you need somebody in authority. If you've got people that you've trusted and you trust in life who are saying these things have happened to them, why not? I don't just believe it for the sake of believing it, but why not just accept that, there's a truth to this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think often, Paul, people can tell you stories about strange phenomenon, and I think when you get an ear for them, you kind of notice that it's the emotion that shines through, whether it's a face-to-face discussion or you're with somebody at a location or even if you just speak to them over the phone. More often than not, it's their emotional resonance when they're telling you what they've experienced that kind of elevates the experiences. Because as you say, I mean, the lads in the ravine is a prime example of this, because they had absolutely no interest in strange phenomenon at all. Not their bag. They were just run-of-the-mill mates who just enjoyed going out, enjoying the countryside, and just indulging themselves in their hobbies and their company.
Absolutely. Hard-working men, worked 5 days a week, sometimes more probably, got a home life, partners, and when the opportunity arises, they'd disappear and do what we've just said. I mean, it's similar jumping to Hummonby. You know, and I interviewed Andrew, because we'd recently done the Awakening conference, and I talked about Hummonby.
Yes.
And I wanted to see if I could just get a few interviews with Andrew actually on film rather than me just relaying the story. So I just inserted a few 60-second segments into the talk. And Andy's son, Nick, and David, who also experienced. But even now, he doesn't believe what he's seen. You know, you hear him describing it, and he's there on film, and he said, and it were round, and it were almost like a flying, like a spaceship that were there, he said. And I said, what, like a flying saucer? He went, yeah, with a glass dome on top. But it can't have been. It just looked like a cheap 1950s spaceship, is his words. And there were almost an alien inside it. Almost. He saw it. You know, he'll admit he saw it, but he can't bend his head around what he's seen. And even myself, when you think about it, jumping back to Hummonby were 1998, and some people listening will think, what's he on about? He's just talking about Hummonby is a village in North Yorkshire, where I know that you know this, where a UFO allegedly landed in August 1998. But even then, the description of the UFO is kind of corny, isn't it? And he's in disbelief himself. A 1950s flying saucer with a glass dome on top. Do you know, it doesn't fit the narrative of what people were expecting, I don't think. If you jump back to the 60s, you could probably say, well, it was like a little flying saucer with a glass dome on top. But that's what he said he saw. But he's in disbelief. He's on film. He said it just didn't seem real. But I'm thinking they're working in an industrial unit on this industrial estate. Everyone else has gone home because they used to work nights, and it's still early evening. And who's going to set that up? Who's going to go to the back of the unit where this huge unit where there's only 3 men working, and let's stage this UFO, and let's get some military personnel all dressed in black in as well. Let's get them armed. Let's shake these men about a bit. To me, were real. I mean, I think it's one of the most incredible UFO accounts that I've heard. It's a sweeping statement to say of all time, but I am hoping somebody's going to come forward. Somebody's going to come out of the woodwork and say, yes, I were in that roadblock earlier in the evening with the military roadblock that's been talked about. Yes, I saw this object. Or yes, I've already had a man contact me about special operations based on what I've been talking about recently. He says he knows nothing about this operation at Hummonby, but he's got knowledge of the special operations and the people I've described, and how they would act, and the what they would use as in weapons, MP5s and things like that. So that part's interesting. But what we want is somebody, even if they want to remain nameless, to come out and give enough detail for me to know that, yeah, they were there on the night. They knew about it. And that's what you're waiting for, because lots of people say to me, why don't you do more on Hummonby? You can't close everything off just waiting for another witness to come forward. I've exhausted loads of avenues on Hummonby, and I think there's more out there. I'm just waiting. You know, it's like Rendlesham. They need new material, they need new witnesses, and there must be people out there. We know military personnel so inexperienced, but there's more military personnel who probably daren't put their head above parapet. But we're 1980. People are getting older, aren't they? Some of these people might not be in good health. Some of them might have passed away. Some of them might be absolutely terrified. We talk about Rendlesham, and just briefly, if you wanted to stay with Rendlesham, I live in Bridlington, little seaside town. I think approximately 6 or 7 miles away, there's another village called Beeford, right? So we're talking about Rendlesham Forest, and the craziest thing, I was given a contact to a guy who lived in Beeford, and he was on the military base, the British military base, close to Rendlesham when it happened. And I probably already said this, guy, so I don't like repeating on the same show, but according to this man, he was a radar operator. the American military arrived on the base in, I think he said, pale blue and white cars. They weren't dressed in military uniform, they were dressed in suits, and they took away the radar tapes. So that's interesting. I spoke to him face to face on 2 occasions. Charles Holt was coming through to the UK, and I told him about it, and I was trying to get him to meet him, but he wouldn't. He was frightened. Did kind of attitude that I've gone all this time without really getting involved in this, and why should I? Why? That's what I felt. Do you know what I mean? Why should I expose myself to any of this now? But there again, there's a witness sat there. Weren't at Rendlesham, at the military. He was at the British base. I can't think what they call brace. Somebody will know. And Watton, I think it was Watton. And so he was at the British base, and he's not got proof of a UFO landing, but he's got more meat to pack around the bone of the Rendlesham story. And there's more people out there like that. There's more people out there for Hummonby. There's more people out there for your listeners who've had a sighting and they think, well, it meant local paper, but nobody else come forward. You've got to dig, you've got to ask, and these people will be there, I'm sure. It's just, I don't know. It's not an inexhaustible resource, as in witnesses, but potentially there's a lot more out there to these cases, and it's such a shame. I just think we need more public acceptance of the reality so people feel brave enough to step forward without persecution or ridicule. You know, persecution is probably a strong word, but if you've got a pension and you work within the military or some governmental body and you've seen and experienced something, like I know, and I wouldn't go into any detail here, but I know that ministerial cars were stopped, I'll not even say it year, driving from Chicksands military base by an object that came over top of cars, all engines cut out. People got out of the cars looking up. And I know this for a fact because the one of the witnesses is a friend of mine, and yes, I do visit him from time to time, and yes, he did work within the government, and and I've got no secrets to hide, but I'm not just going to talk about who it was. Simple as.
Yeah, I think that's the thing as well, Paul, because especially in this day and age, and you'll probably know this better than most, there seems to be more of an acceptance of strange phenomena in certain media outlets these days.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to, it's like panning for gold. Often you'll get a lot of crap and there'll be some real nuggets of information or compelling stories.
Yeah.
And you can see that. Whereas you look at certain things that have happened in the past, I mean, as you mentioned, Hummonby, Rendlesham, it's 45 years this Christmas.
Yeah.
Other than the media, there was no avenue really for people to explain. And as you say, a lot of people didn't know who to speak to or how to get in touch with people, because obviously back at, as you say, looking at Rendlesham's a prime example of this. I mean, it took 3 years for it to hit the media. So already we're 3 years down the line. And not a lot of people outside of a very niche sort of group of people in those days would have been aware of how to report a UFO sighting or strange phenomena or who to speak to. Trying to get hold of somebody like Jenny Randalls in 1983, unless you knew exactly who she was and where to find her, you'd no outlet for that, Paul.
You'd just sit in silence, wouldn't you? And if you went down an official channel, you'd get closed down. You know what I mean? You'd either get told nothing, or let's assume that you actually knew a little bit more than they wanted you to talk about, they'd silence you somehow, they'd quieten you. I know. It's difficult to say this because you don't leave yourself open for criticism, but you leave yourself open. Well, you're saying this, but you're not saying it, are you? But you've got to respect people. And I know a person, a couple in East Yorkshire, and one of them works for a government body, and they've seen something, and they've been visited and told not to talk about it. So I'm not. So this person's been through to my home and told me all about what they've seen, and they need people they can trust. That's all I'll say about that one. One day I might get the green light to talk about it, and you'll hear about an incredible UFO event, literally in East Yorkshire, another one. And but that's this present day you can't say it. But back in the day, they were nowhere, and you didn't have the internet like you've got today with this. You can sort of type something and post it onto some UFO group or via Facebook or via some other platform, and suddenly it's everywhere in the world, this cross-pollination of information. And there were none of that then, were they? You know, it's just the way of things. And maybe in some ways it's a bad thing, and in other ways, because of this, we can get the news out, we can get the word out quickly. Can you imagine if the Roswell crash had occurred yesterday? And there's a reality to this, and it's a flying saucer, and that news wouldn't have just ended up in a newspaper and then retracted or whatever they did. Everybody would have known about it across the planet now, wouldn't they? They have now, but it's took since 1947 for everything to sort of propagate and get put out there.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely. I mean, you only have to look at, say, I mean, a prime example of this, Paul, is the Phoenix Lights, which 1997. And so we're just at that cusp, but we're fortunate enough that there were people who had video cameras. So we've got some footage. But that, if you imagine now, if that happened tomorrow,
absolutely,
there'd be obviously there are hundreds of thousands of people. I think Dr. Kitai has got 1,200 witness statements for what occurred that night over at her Phoenix Museum that they've got there these days. And obviously there's some video footage, photographs and stuff. But if that happened tomorrow, that would be live streamed by hundreds of people, and we'd all know exactly what was happening, and we wouldn't have to sort of dance around these nonsensical excuses that get put forward all the time, because we don't have a body of evidence to disprove sometimes what they're saying.
And like you said, and over the years, these bits of information get diluted and they get contaminated, and then nobody actually knows what the truth is and what the lie is. You know, this morning I don't watch many YouTube podcasts or anything really, not because they're not good. I just don't have time. But somebody sent me a link, and it were only 7 or 8 minutes to the professor guy. Is it Professor Simon? I can't think of it. He's got white hair, and he's been talking about UFOs, UAPs, and science and all sorts of things. But during this short interview that's 7 or 8 minutes long, on the 7-minute mark or thereabouts, and I only know that because whoever sent me the link said, you know, listen to 7-minute mark. Somebody's contacted him who's photographed a UAP stroke UFO close to area Fylingdales, and they've had a response back from Fylingdales saying that, not the exact words I'm using here, but we're aware of the UAPs, we're aware of the UFOs, but they're of no threat, so we ignore them. And I thought, wow. I mean, I'd have liked to have seen the letter. I don't know whether he put the letter up. I don't think he did. But he's quite a credible guy, and for him to say it on a YouTube channel, it's a big channel. I would have thought that he has got the letter to back up what he's saying, or the email. Once again, it'd be good to speak to man or woman on phone to verify it as well. But that tells a lot, doesn't it? That speaks volumes, because if you've got unidentified flying objects, UAPs, spheres of light, flying over one of the most sensitive sort of radar facilities in the United Kingdom, and they don't think it's a defence significance or a threat, I'd be worried. You know, if I were a foreign power, and I'd be thinking, how can we develop this? Because they're not interested. They clearly are, but that's the line they've put out. Yeah, we could mask it, and we could send something in potentially that's displaying like these UAPs, like the spheres of light, but actually it's not. And we could do some serious damage. I think we should be worried about anything that's an intrusion into our airspace. And to say that they're not bothered, is that telling us that they're not bothered because they know they're ours? There's loads of connotations, isn't there, as to why they're not bothered? You know, is it because they're testing these things, or is it because these things are actually flying and patrolling around the airspace of Fylingdales because they are guardians, for want of a better word? And I don't mean some kind of sentient intelligence. I'm on about something man-made. It just makes you wonder.
Well, it does, especially in the current climate, Paul, because there've been numerous stories this year of incursions near our airspace and in our waters from foreign powers. And so they've had to scramble jets out and ships to just go, hello, we know you're here, thanks very much. So if anything, right now, I would imagine that the British military are on high alert, probably more so than they have been at any point since the end of the Cold War, Paul.
Yeah, I would agree. It's terrifying, isn't it? And that's not a word to use lightly, I realise that, but it's frightening if you actually analyse what's happening with the world and to other nations. And I know that we talk about unexplained phenomena, but in the event of something catastrophic happening, I mean, I can only think of myself, my family, your family. We all look first to our own, but do we think that some other outside intelligence would step forward to try and save mankind? What do you guys think listening to this? I mean, I don't know, because there's been enough wars and disasters in the past, and I don't think it's happened. I know there's references in ancient texts about seeing things appearing in the skies and favouring one side to another. So are they trying to steer a certain faction of humanity in one direction and not another? But, you know, if it were really put to the test and we were looked like we were on the cusp, you said the cusp earlier, if we looked like we were on the cusp of actual world disaster, who thinks that some other intelligence, would call them a non-human intelligence, would step up to the plate and stop this chaos? In the past, it used to be wars with guns, then it wars with swords and spears, then probably wars with clubs and stone tools. But now, a world war on this planet could impact outwards into the sort of the vastness of space, implications anyway. So that might be the time that some other intelligence would step forward.
I suppose also, like you say there, Paul, I mean, the one thing that we can always say about human history is that somebody's having a war with somebody at probably every single given moment of time.
Yeah.
We can look around the world right now. There are conflicts in Europe, conflicts in Africa, conflicts in Asia, conflicts in the Middle East. And so you would say, well, how bad does it have to get? Really?
Yeah, well, I would agree. But my only thoughts were that if we looked like it were going to go down the nuclear path...
Oh, absolutely.
Then that's when you wonder if some other external force would step forward and try and I don't know, alleviate things. But like you, I'm not that confident that any of that would happen. But I suppose we cling to hope, because the more I look at news, the more disheartened I am that we're going down into a dark place at the moment, or the world as a whole. I'm sorry to lower tone, guys, that are listening to this, or put you into a bad or dark place. I'm not trying to, but the stark reality is that it's not great at the moment, is it, the world?
Well, absolutely. And I think this is one of the things as well. You can look at the sort of explosion in UFO reports in the 50s and the contactee movement, Paul. There was a lot of that kind of protectiveness that was being shared, and the messages in general was all about people getting messages saying they didn't like the direction we were going, we needed to be careful with unleashing nuclear power and things like that. That seems to have been one of those constants throughout. It's slightly changed, I think, because you look at certain experiences over the years. I know when we have the aerial school experience in Zimbabwe, which some people have tried to dismiss as childhood fantasy, but and everybody hangs their hat on this one witness who claims that everybody saw a rock, but obviously the people who were trying to push that weren't aware of an interview he did 15 years ago telling everybody he'd seen exactly the same thing. So which is it, buddy? You've already changed your story now. And their general consensus was all about protecting the environment and animals, which is similar to what was being said in the 50s, but it's changed. And there have been a few witnesses and experiences in the last decade or so where environmental issues seem to be a core message. So there's always been that kind of be careful what you're doing message. It's just the language seems to have adapted.
The language is adapted, and we'll jump to that in a moment. But the shape of the UFOs adapted, the shape of the explanations has adapted. No longer do we explain these things away as swamp gas and weather balloons. We've got as we've evolved, and progressed with technology, we're finding more exotic excuses for what these things could be. But the language and the way that I really don't know where it starts and where it stops, to be honest, Paul. It's so difficult because, and jumping back to it, one man's proof is another man. We go onto the cliff tops. I've jumped away from your question slightly, but somebody will see a satellite or space station, and they're blown away. They'll come away saying that they've seen UFO activity, and they haven't. So in some instances, you realise that some people will settle for anything for proof, and they don't do the kind of due diligence. But I don't know, Paul. Jumping back to what were you saying before? Because I lost the thread when I was talking.
That's all right. We were just talking about the change of the language and the shapes of the craft, how they've seemed to have similar, but they have changed over the last 70 years.
The message to mankind as well, that assuming that somebody's had some interaction with the unknown others, the non-human intelligence, the aliens, for want of a better word, like you said earlier. You could see I was fishing around because I'd forgot I'd lost the thread. I went on with something else. So sorry, guys. The message is, you be kind to the planet, or impending doom. You're going to sort of self-implode. You're going to self-destruct, and I wonder how much of that message is to aid the visitors. I wonder if we're a crop. What if they're just educating us to take more care of their asset? What if it's a terrible thought, but if we were a crop, and I've said this recently, so somebody's maybe listening to this is going to say, I talked about this other week, but they talk about abductions seem to have dropped off now. People aren't getting abducted as much. I don't know whether that's true, but let's assume that they're not. Well, but then again, it comes in waves every 20 years, every 1,000 years. I don't know. But what if they're just checking out the state of play and the progression of the crop? We level an area of rainforest and turn it over to grassland, and we put cattle on it. Well, I don't, but people put cattle on it and raise this crop as such. It doesn't necessarily have to be wheat or barley. It's a food source that they would be raising. What if that's what we are? It's a terrible thought. And what if we're close to critical mass and all of this chaos that's in the world at the moment is all part of this big end game? I mean, we're jumping all over the place here, aren't we? But
that's the joy of strange phenomena, Paul. It leads you down all kinds of corridors, buddy.
Absolutely. And I know people like they love it when, I get an account and I talk about the strange and unusual. And, the property that I live in, I've turned into 3 flats. So I've told people quite a few times. And Bob Brown, Bob?
Yeah.
He lives in the very top flat. And earlier this week, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, I get to the computer early doors. And I don't get up as early as him. He'll have been up at 4 o'clock. So he's in a quite fair bit of pain with his hip and that. He's waiting, he's not in a good way. But he said he were in the flat. And it was 5 a.m. when it happened. He's sat in, no TV on, he's just sat having a cup of tea. And obviously daylight. He doesn't have to shut his curtains because he's at the top floor and there's no windows overlooking him. He said, and a little girl appeared in his room. Literally walked from between the settee, a unit and the settee. Little girl with long blonde hair, with her back to him, and with sort of facing away, so he didn't see her face, and walked a few paces and just disappeared. He's not told me out for ages. He's seen odd things in the flat while he's lived in it for years and years. But he's never told me anything, and never anything like that before. And I've just got a message saying that a strange thing happened early this morning. When you've got time, come up, I want to tell you about it. So I did, and that's what he told me. Weirdest thing, but this property, just like a lot of your listeners, and we've all lived in places where strange things happen or have happened. And there's lots of strange things happened in this property, but that's just another one, to add to it. On the Cliptops this week, what day? Wednesday. I went to the conference last Saturday, not the Saturday gone before, and the lovely lady was at the conference with her friends, and we meet them. We've done it for years at conferences, and all sort of have a chat and congregate. So Wendy came. But she also told me that she was coming to Bempton for 4 or 5 days with her husband. It was her birthday, and she was coming with her husband, so that was great. Would it be okay to meet up? Well, we were up there Wednesday. So Steve, her husband, great guy, complete skeptic.
Yep.
Doesn't believe it. Never had an experience ever. So we're up there. He'd not dressed in unsuitable clothing, but he'd dressed in unsuitable clothing to be stood for 3 or 4 hours on the cliff tops at Bempton.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He'd got a jacket on and stuff, but he was cold.
Yeah.
So instead of standing right on edge of North Sea on the fence. He'd gone into this little hollowed bit, which would be about 30 foot away. You've been up there, you know what I mean.
I do.
And he stood talking, and he's a great guy. Never, and, I was speaking to him, he said, never seen anything. He says, but, this is what Wendy likes to do. She says, and I support her. But personally, I've never seen anything in my life. So that was that. We set off walking back, say, 11 p.m. Now, because they're in this little hollowed bit, we got all the stuff together and we set off, not without them, but they were behind. So I got a weak torch, and he's been walking probably about 100 yards. And I just said, is Wendy and Steve okay? And I just turned back. And he says, yeah, and he just shone his torch behind him. He said, just waiting for... There's nobody there. And he became shocked and confused. There were me, there were them two, Wendy and Steve, Pete, Jack, Linny and myself. I think Mark were there as well. Mark comes later. So what's the matter? He said, there was somebody here. I thought it were one of you guys, because there's no street lighting up there. So he just assumed that somebody, because it's on an horseshoe, that stand, isn't it? It's shaped like an horseshoe. So we'd all come off it, and he assumed that somebody had just gone behind him. He says, I remember looking in my peripheral and seeing legs, just black legs walking, and I knew Wendy were behind me, and it weren't her. And it's really shook him up. And so much so he wouldn't talk about it. We met him again on Friday. He'd talk about it, but he wouldn't allow me to record him. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
I love to record people. Rather, I'm just telling you guys something that's happened, and you take me at face value, and you either think, this guy's got an active imagination, hasn't he? Or telling truth, or if whenever possible, I get the witness to add a little bit. Do you know that it just don't make it real, but it gives it a little bit more substance. So that happened. And there were enough witnesses to hear him tell the story. So that was that. We'd been up there hours and with them and saw nothing, experienced nothing. So we jump forward to Friday night. We get there, they arrive a little bit later than us. He's dressed a little bit warmer. And like I said, he wouldn't talk about it. He's talking about it to us, but not for me to do a short or anything I can put on YouTube. So that was that. So nothing happened. The night just drifted through and came and went, and we set off to walk back. So we walked all the way along the path, and Pete, who's a regular member at team, a great guy. I mean, I've known Pete 30 years. I mean, this is strange. I worked with him 30 years ago, and he didn't even know I'd got an interest in this, and I never asked him if he had. That's the way people were. We just didn't talk about this subject unless you want to ridicule kind of thing on a building site anyway. Yeah. So Pete, we stopped at where we get off the path to go up to the visitor compound. We stopped to allow Pete to catch his breath, because he's just had 3 heart operations, and he's only been coming back up there for about, 2 months. He's had to have a complete... he's been homebound, literally, after operations for months. So we stopped because he gets a bit breathless. And there's some guys we'd seen as we set off walking from Speeton. I hope it's not too long-winded for you guys, this, but it's interesting. This is Friday night, remember. We've had the experience, or Steve has, on the Wednesday. Total skeptic. So these 2 guys catch us up, and I'm a little bit in front. I think I was with Jack. And I could hear them talking to Linny and others, and I've just seen this, and I thought, Paul's little ears prick up. Walked out, and I looked, and it's a fisherman called Chris Mack. I said, hey, Chris. He went, yeah. Sort of put his hand out. And yeah, good to see you, mate. He said, yeah, just come for a walk. He says, this is my best mate. He said, and he wanted to come with me. He says, but he don't believe in any of this, but something's happened. I said, all right, yeah. So they've been to Speeton. So picture that as the middle. We've been at that side. They've been right up there at that side. They've been probably 1.5 miles away from us. They get to what's called the trig point, and the ice point, 420 feet, and then they walk back. And just before you turn off to go down towards a place called Buckton, you'll have to Google these locations, people, if you want to see the actual layout of the land. Buckton and Bempton Cliffs, there's a path that goes down. So Chris is looking out to sea, he says, and about 100 yards away, these blue lights come out of the ground at 45 degrees. Right? Yeah. 2, bosh, straight up, and then filled in. He says, and it looked like Amorite paint, blue Amorite paint, sparkling. He said, just straight out, switched off, straight out, switched off, and I think he said it came over the top of him. I am hoping to speak to him this week. I spoke to him on the night, and he's shaking. He says, I can't even believe I'm saying this. I can't believe I've seen something, because I've never seen out in my life. And I just can't believe I'm talking about it. And look at me, I'm shaking. And then Chris has been in touch and said he's still on about it now. And he went back up the other day with his partner, again, sort of, I don't know, for verification, to have another look. He says, we went to where we'd seen it. I wanted to find somebody. I wanted to find something. There was nothing there. So it's an interesting story. I mean, it's a new one. Just when you think you've heard everything, we get this blue pyramid thing that just comes up out of the ground. So that's interesting in itself. But what I find fascinating is, on the Wednesday, we've got a skeptically minded person. And he has this weird experience where he sees these legs.
Yeah.
And some people might say, well, it'd be his wife, and he weren't sure. He said, no, she was behind me. So Wednesday, then on Friday, we've got another skeptically minded person who sees this pyramid. Are we being too forward-thinking, imagining that the phenomena might have done that deliberately? I don't know. It's interesting. And the legs, jump into the legs that this guy saw, I would think now for almost a year, definitely 10 months, we've all seen this shadow of a person. I've seen it. I think I've seen it twice. Both times with Pete, and we've both seen it. You know Philip Kinsella?
Yeah.
Philip came up to Cliftops. He didn't know anything about it. Sarah has met him at conferences and that, my eldest daughter, and she says, oh, Philip's coming up, and Ron, she says, I'll come up. Just to talk to them. She's not bothered about unexplained phenomena. She works hard for a living, and they've got the 3 kids. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So she came up, she's talking to Philip in the darkness, just looking, 20 foot in front of them, and they both joined, oh my God, did you see it? And Sarah's going, yeah, I saw it. Did you see it? And it just went across fast, just the shape of a person. But we're not breaking new ground, because if you speak to the fishermen who fished up there, some of them for 50 years, literally 40, 50 years they've gone literally fishing those cliff tops, and they see it. They've seen it. We call it the ghost of big railings. And we've seen this thing. Sometimes there's a sphere of light, and they assume it's the headlight of a deceased fisherman. That's the narrative that they put onto it. Yeah. But it's this place. It just never fails to amaze. The blue light shooting out of the ground. 2019, myself and Bob Brown met Rick and PJ and Craig, who'd gone there. They were going to do an all-nighter. It were raining, and we only went up out of decency, because the good guys, and they've travelled a fair distance, let's go up and have a few hours with them. Do you know what I mean? That's what we did. It was a Saturday night. I preferred to have a beer, to be honest with you, than what else on a Saturday night. So anyway, we set off back home, and they walked up with us. And as we're walking up the path, there were Rick, Craig, PJ, Paul and Bob. So there's 5 people. Yeah. 4 of us. The only one that didn't see it was PJ, who was about 7 foot bloody tall. And why he never saw it, I don't know. No, it'd be 6'6". This red light just punched out of the ground. It literally, not near where the blue thing was seen, but literally just punched out of the ground, and we all saw it. No mistaking it. And it punched out of the ground as fast as anything, and it looked electric. But it dissipated over a few seconds. So there was some kind of electricity to it. I don't know what that was. So I went up one side of the edge, because it went in between visitor compound and RAF base. Yeah. So I went up there's an edge road that runs up. So I went one side, Craig went other, Bob and PJ went into car park. Rick's just stood, pretty gobsmacked, to be honest with you, by what he'd just seen. So it always hits you when you least expect it. I guess that's what I'm saying. We go up there looking for it, and chances are we're not going to experience it. I don't want to put a downer on anybody that goes to these locations, because obviously, you're not going to experience anything if you don't look and you don't explore. But chances are it'll be when you least expect it that the actual phenomena strikes.
One of the reasons I've been looking forward to speaking to you, other than I always enjoy time in your company, my friend, is Easter, me and my partner, we went up to Spittal, which is next to Berwick. So smack on the East Coast. We got a lovely B&B, 100-yard front seafront, beautiful big windows, 2 reclining chairs, nice little table in between us, and we'd journey up from Yorkshire. So we thought we'll have a steady night, went out for fish and chips, and we just thought, all right, we'll sit here. Brilliant. We could see all the sea. We were watching boats going by, looking at the stars, just thinking, this is lovely. We'd been watching for about an hour, and I got a ship tracker downloaded, because I thought, I wonder what that is, And we were checking all ships out. A few planes came over, Yeah, got plane tracker, obviously. You've got to make sure you know what you're looking at. And as we're doing this, all of a sudden this white ball of light appears, like brighter than anything else. And we're both there, and I went, look at that, look at that. So we're watching it for about 5 minutes. And because we were just in the moment, we didn't have phones with us or anything that were charging up. So my partner said, right, grab your phone, turn the light off, grab your phone. So as she got up, she walked round towards the bedside table where the light was, turned it off, and as soon as she turned it off and started coming back, it just went, poof,
gone,
disappeared. No clouds, wasn't a plane, wasn't on my satellite tracker either. But even if it was a satellite, Paul, there was nothing to obscure it. It just popped in, and we must have seen it, I don't know, 8-9 seconds.
And what, it's static?
No, it was moving. That's what made us clock it, because it flew under a star, so there was a fixed point. Yeah,
so you've got a point of reference, haven't you?
Absolutely. And the clouds were going left to right, and this was going right to left. So it was going into the wind.
Yeah.
And it just popped, and I just laughed. And my partner said, what are you laughing for? I said, it's typical, isn't it? I said, as soon as we started, right, we can see what's going on here. As soon as we focused on it, it went.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But it's one of those strange things, because obviously, you know, I sent you that stuff last year and you said, oh, I think that's the ISS. And I said, well, I've never seen it that quick. And it was.
Yeah.
So a couple of weeks ago, I met up with some friends and we went out. And at 10 o'clock, this, once again, ball of light came flying over, super fast. And my mate says, oh, I reckon that's the ISS. I said, well, I'll check, because I've still got that link on my phone that you sent me, Paul. Checked it, said due in Sheffield between 10 and 5 past, and it was 4 minutes past 10. We watched it fly over. And like you mentioned earlier, I think unless you are aware of how to check yourself, because it's easy to see things, like you said, the amount of satellites I watch now.
Incredible, yeah.
I mean, I've seen one every night this week outside at around 11 o'clock. And the thing you notice about them is that they have a constant line of travel. Yeah. They don't fluctuate.
They don't veer off anywhere, do they?
And so I suppose for some people it's quite surprising, because it is amazing how many people never notice satellites until they see something odd, Paul.
You're spot on. I mean, let's face it, the vast majority of people walk around looking at the phone, talking to their friends, and they're not looking for it. You can't blame them, I suppose. But there's so much up there that I suppose that's why, I don't know, ancient people, races and civilizations probably who sat around fires and didn't have all the distractions that we've got today, probably did note things, and with limited bits of writing that we've got that available from the time, and even rock art, you know, it's depicting things of wonder in the skies and in the heavens, and there's no wonder if that's what they spent a lot of time doing. You know, I spoke to a traveller, probably late last year or August time last year, who'd had an incredible sighting on Dartmoor of a cryptid type creature, and had asked me not to use his name, and he asked me not to use the audio or any audio or anything, because he sent me the phone footage of his trying to film this thing. He said, but he said to me, if you were respectful and you went to the traveller community, and he says, I think you would be surprised if you asked them about what they may have seen, unexplained phenomena and things like that. He said, I think you'd probably be pleasantly surprised that you would get people telling you the stories of what they've seen and experienced. And I thought, yeah, do you know, I might reach out and do that, you know, because, no, I don't mean all of the time. I mean, there's people in travelling community that probably never look up at the sky, but you imagine that they spend a lot of time out in the open, so they're going to have seen and experienced things, obviously. I mean, that's bulk of the time. It's when you're out in these open spaces, be it woodland, be it open moorland or anything, be it just fishing. And this goes for everybody, not just kind of traveller community. You see things, don't you? You've got to be in those environments. We know you can see something in your own home, but for the most part, the reports that are coming to me are in remote places, and places where, you know, I was driving along at 3 o'clock in the morning and suddenly a sphere of light started following me down the road. It's tailing my car. And then it's looking into, it's almost in back window. You know, I've got lots of reports of this light and not just in East and North Yorkshire, all over the country, where they've been sort of paced by a sphere of light, which is and often it's frightening, because obviously you don't know what it is. And for the people that talk about it being an helicopter, they're talking about these things almost being like the Foo Fighters that were around the aircraft, and they're at the side of the car, they're in front of the car, they're all over the place. Loads of reports of the spheres of light. You're not telling me that that's not an intelligence. There's loads of places, if it were ball lightning, that this thing could go and dissipate, but it chooses to follow a vehicle or people. The guy broke down on North Yorkshire moors, not far from Fylingdales, years ago. I think we're going back to late 1990s, early 2000s with this, and obviously he could see lights of habitation in the distance. Yeah, it's a long way away, but he has to walk. And as he's walking the road, and if you've been up there, people, it's bleak. A sphere of light appears about 30 to 40 foot away from him on the moorland. And it paced him for what he said were miles. Frightened him to death. Just a red football-sized sphere of light. And they're just other elements of the unexplained that are just as interesting as people's ghost sightings or, people's black dog sightings. There's one from Flamborough, of a guy walking from the pub at Flamborough, and all right, he's been to the pub. I'm not assuming he's drunk or anything, but he contacted me to tell me that he's walking down Flamborough Road. It's the road that goes down to North Landing. I can't think of name.
No, I know what you mean. I've been there. Yeah.
I think it's called. In the night, there's nobody about. He's walking down the road. He can see the shadow of a great big dog, but there's no dog. There's no dog, and it's there. He can see his own shadow, and he can see the shadow of a big dog walking down. What's all that about? What is that? I don't pretend to know. People. A lady contacted me a few weeks ago. Lighthouse Road, going towards Flamborough. Yeah. Her son. When young fellas get a motorbike and suddenly they've got untold freedom, haven't they? They can go anywhere. So there's a group of them on motorbikes. I should imagine if you lived in Airy and you heard these motorbikes in early hours of the morning, you wouldn't be happy. But by the by, she told me he'd seen an unusual animal at 3 a.m. And I got his number. I got speaking to this fella, and sure enough, he said, "I don't know what it was." He says, "I can't explain what I saw." He says, I've got a better bike than others." He says, "So I were in front." He says, "And I came round this corner at Lighthouse Road, and it stood at side of road. It's not on 2 legs, it's on 4 legs, but it weren't a horse, it weren't a deer, it were all shaggy fur. It just looked like it didn't belong." He said, "And it was huge." He said, "And then it just sort of wandered off into undergrowth, and I'd gone past, stopped, thought, what have I just seen? Has he mistaken? Has he seen a cow outside at road?" It's difficult, isn't it? Not everything's unexplained phenomena. But I think when people take the time to come forward, usually they've seen something unusual. It troubles them. Do you know what I mean? It's just like when I said I'd been listening to that interview earlier with Jim. Probably it's more than 2 years ago, this interview at the bottom of our garden here, at this property. And, I'd missed little bits of it. He was saying, like, it troubled me and troubled me. He says, for months and months, I'd lay for hours and hours, kind of turning it over in my mind. Did I actually see that? I can't believe what I saw. I saw something that's not supposed to exist. And and it really troubled me. And then he's saying, Steve, he says he thinks it bothered Steve more than it bothered him, and the both men were, it's PTSD. They were traumatized by what they'd seen. Yeah. And imagine that internal trauma. If we don't have to go into mechanics of if somebody did something terrible to another individual, I think we can all imagine what it would be. Yes. Or potentially. And the trauma that you must feel, and in most instances you've got an avenue to go down when the time is right to tell people. And people, if it's happened, will believe you. But this, the actual cryptid phenomena, the UFO phenomena, the abduction phenomena, where do you go? We know there's people who are into regressing individuals, and there's people out there who've sort of lost all credibility from academia for going down the route of alien abduction. John Mack, an absolutely incredible man who interviewed abductees. Yeah. And I wouldn't say he lost credibility. I mean, weren't he a Pulitzer Prize winner?
Yes. Yes, he was. Yeah,
You know, but what I'm saying is these people are few and far between. So where do people go to share these traumatic experiences? A real life traumatic experience, as in done at the hands of individuals, you've got an avenue and somebody's going to potentially believe you. But you talk about seeing something like what these guys saw in Broxer Forest. You talk about waking up in your room and seeing beings around you that weren't human. And you're risking having the tag on your medical notes of, I don't know, he's having some kind of psychotic episode. This guy's, I don't know what the terminology would be, but it's difficult. So it's just crazy.
It is. I mean, I noticed 2 of the recent video that you've uploaded to your channel, Paul.
Okay.
You've spoken to a couple of people who have been up at Bempton who have had... They haven't seen anything, but they've been overwhelmed with the presence that scared them.
The fear.
I mean, I think it's Alex is the one on the most recent one. And you can tell when you're talking to him, he really doesn't want to be there.
No.
And you can hear the fear in his voice. And you said to him at one point, would you have come up here again on your own? And he went, no, not at all. And though he's, you know, not that I'm suggesting he's using you as a security blanket, Paul, but he clearly felt a lot better being there again with you rather than being there again with his friend, because obviously he knows you know what's going on up there. And
it's terrible, Paul. The fear. I think the fear. I mean, I don't know what kind of phenomena it is, apart from we feel fear, but it's something that needs loads and loads more work, because it steps over all the genres of the unexplained, and this fear that descends upon a person. And is it some kind of frequency that changes that's making us feel like that? We know we don't know. Are we in the presence of something that's changing it, or is it mind altering as well? Because I used this example other day when we did Wolflands and we talked to Gaz, who was sat on top of Scalby Mills, and he likes looking at the stars and look, you know, the northern lights. You've got brilliant views from Scalby Mills, and he noted that he could hear the sea, because you look over the top, you're in the bay. I think it's Jackson's Bay that is the other side, and suddenly he heard a noise in the distance, like the cracking of branches, and then he realised that everything had gone quiet. He couldn't hear the seagulls. It's night time. These seagulls, they're better eyes than owls. There's telephone wires at the back of my house here. We'll get back to the story, but on a night you can come out and they're swooping about all over. They don't seem to hit the telly. They've got great eyes, so that you could hear the seagulls. Can't hear them. Can't hear the sea. So that tells me that I don't think the phenomena is King Canute. I don't think it can stop the sea. So it's done something inside here rather than suppressed all the animal noises.
Yes.
You know, because people say everything went quiet. You couldn't hear a cricket. You couldn't hear anything. That's in other countries as well. I'm not sure it does, you know. Whatever it is has targeted, I think, the individual.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine the sea stopping, or the sea, suddenly the all audible sounds of the sea stop. There's something happening maybe on a chemical level, you know, to the individual, this extreme fear that's just overcome them. I really don't know. But the fear, jumping to Bempton, Mark, who comes up with us, he'd recently buried his dog. He'd had this little dog used to come up with him all the time, little Whippet. And he was feeling a bit sombre, and he were walking up to where this dog was, where he'd laid this dog to rest. And so that were on his mind. So his mind's detached. He's not really that bothered about unexplained phenomena. We'll be up there at 10 o'clock at night, and Mark will just appear out at darkness. You know, and have you seen old lads? Do you know what I mean? He don't come up at 8 o'clock with us, but he's a good friend. He's become a good friend over the years. Yeah. But he goes all over. He's from Halifax, but he lives in Bempton. Yeah. And he's been here a few years. And where am I going with this? If he goes back to Halifax with his partner, he'll just go camping somewhere. He'll just go wild camping, or he'll go to Scotland sometimes, wild camping. Man, familiar with land. He said, suddenly, I just walked into this fear. I said, I've never experienced it before. He says, and as I'm walking, it's getting stronger and stronger. And he said, I felt like somebody were going to jump out of me. He says, I felt like eyes were all over me. And he says, and I just thought, face your fear, keep walking. He says, and I did. And then it just lifted. You But there's so many people up there that are experiencing this fear. I've experienced it once at Bempton in early hours at morning when sheep were being killed, and once when I was Steve Ashbridge back at Danes Dyke. And I told Steve couldn't feel it. I said, I feel frightened. I says, we've got to go. He says, what do you mean? He says, I feels like there's eyes all over me. He says, I can't explain it. It's horrible. Proper frightened. And there's so many people experiencing this fear, not just there, but all over the place. And you experience, and is it a perception that we're getting? Is it almost animalistic? You know, you probably realise when somebody's staring at you, don't you? You can almost feel it, especially if it's with intent. And or you can go into a bar, or you can go, I'd say a pub environment, because I can go into a place. Don't go in many pubs, to be honest with you, nowadays, but I could go into a pub and I don't mean at me, but if the atmosphere is a little bit hostile. Yes. You can kind of look around and just reading body language and reading what's coming from the people, you think, be careful there. Something's going to happen there.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I don't think I'm unique. I think we can all do this. And I don't know whether the phenomena is sort of, laying a bit of its intent onto a person and putting us into a state of not our readiness, but its readiness to perform what it wants to do. And maybe just laying the fear onto somebody is all it wants, because it might just get a kick off the fear that's been exuded from the person. I realise all of these things that we're talking about mean something and mean nothing, because we've no proof. The only proof we've got are that people are experiencing this extreme fear. And where it comes from, I don't know. There was a young guy, he had I assume he's still got a car, like a little souped-up car that he used to go into Broxer Forest with, around the logging roads and just bomb about. Maybe he shouldn't have been in there doing what he did, but he used to do. He says, and he drove up this particular road this evening, it's just getting dark, and he'd come to a little bit of a bottleneck and he had to turn round, do a three-point turn. And he said, but all of a sudden, there's nothing there. If you go into these forests, there's nothing, just trees and an old logging road that's not very wide. But this fear just came over him. He just couldn't get out of it quick enough. He says, it's a wonder he didn't burst the tyres screaming out at forest. He said, I just couldn't explain it. He said, because there were no reason to feel it, but it just came upon him. And there's loads and loads of instances of this extreme fear and this silence that we drop into, this lower silence that I'm not sure is a silence that, as we understand it, if we turn volume down on this now and you started talking, that's the silence that we've... Yeah. But I think it's something that the phenomena is doing to the individual. I'm not sure if it's... they'll say, oh, birds stopped twittering. Couldn't hear nothing. Maybe they didn't stop twittering. Or maybe they did. Maybe they did perceive something and everything just went quiet. I've not got the ultimate answer for this, but I'm thinking that it's affecting the individual more than it's affecting the environment.
I think you've got, for me, Paul, I think there are two kinds of things going on there. I mean, you've got this, like you say, people, whether it's a haunting, a cryptid sighting, a UFO sighting, there are numerous people that talk about everything stopped. Yep. It's like they're in a vacuum because they perceive everything's gone silent. But I think, like you say, if you're talking about the sea's not going to stop crashing onto the beach, is it? No. So the only thing that could cause that kind of feeling is really that person seems to be in some kind of vacuum where they can't hear anything. But everything else, like you said, their perception is everything's gone silent. But whereas I think they're actually in some kind of vacuum that stops them hearing anything going on, and everything's carrying on as normal, as though whatever's going on wants their attention and pulls everything away from them for some reason. Or, like you say about these feelings of incredible fear that come over it, I've had that happen to me once when I was in Scotland at Glencoe. Never had any feeling like that in my life. We were supposed to stay there for 2 days. We went after the first night. I just felt so uncomfortable there.
Really?
That it was peculiar. It was a very odd sensation. Like you were mentioning, I've been in environments where you can tell there's a hostile environment or things are agitated and there's going to be trouble. You can just feel it. You can almost smell it sometimes, I think. Whereas these seem like bubbles. And I know probably one of the best examples of this in my experience is John Keel when he's writing about some of the events at Point Pleasant outside of the Mothman. And he discovered these like zones of fear where you could step in and out of them. And it was almost as like it was a bubble of emotion. And so that, I think, is odd, because often you will get people who are so terrified, like you say, that your body starts to get into that fight or flight mode. And for some people, they freeze and they don't know what to do. But I remember reading when Keel was talking about it, he forced himself to continue walking and he just felt like he'd popped out of a bubble. Yeah. And then he thought, well, this is really odd. So he turned around, did it again, and the same thing happened. And he said it took so much effort for him to keep moving forwards. Yeah. That he just felt so drained afterwards. And you see that in countless other things. And I think these are two separate things, but they give the impression of being the same thing. But I think emotionally and the stimulus are very different. And it doesn't make sense, really, because it's an alien emotion or an alien situation to find ourselves in, especially when you're in nature, because when you go out walking or you enjoy these places, Paul, we both know it's really noisy.
You don't expect it, do you? You just don't expect to be thrust into an environment that's totally the opposite of how it is, the sounds of nature, the smells of nature. You just don't expect it. That's why it becomes so surreal. You imagine, I think in one of the books, I gave my interpretation of it as imagining if you were at bottom at sea, trapped in an air pocket in a boat. And you can imagine that's that feeling of solitude and seclusion and fear that you must feel, and everything around you is sort of happening, but you can't hear anything. You're not aware of anything. It's terrifying, and it's something. It's an element of the phenomena that I talk about people's sightings of UFOs and things and cryptid type sightings, but these parts of it, I think, are just as important, and the telltale signs of an event that's about to happen, or I think of something that's about to happen. I mean, Mark said, just like you said, he walked through it. He said, and everything kind of lifted, and he's testing himself. We know when he comes, we can see a car come down the lane, and we're about half a mile away on Cliptop. And we watch for him now, because he'd walk down out of the darkness and never put a torch on, but now he does. And he stands on stand and he puts torch on, and we'll put a torch on so that he doesn't take a left and go up towards RAF base. He takes a right and comes to where we are, because you don't want to walk a mile for nothing. Yeah. But we know now, and as he's walking up and he puts torch on from time to time and he's having a look round. It's really rattled him. And Bob Brown experienced it on cliff tops, and he went with a tri-field meter on his own, just had a little wander off, and then I can see him sort of shining a torch, and like you can see his arms moving. I said, "What's up?" He said, "I feel frightened." I never heard him say that. Do you know what I mean? He's a little old man, probably about 5'2". He's only little Bob. I'm only 5'6", by the way, but he's smaller than me, and so I think he's 77, 78-year-old. Don't go up there and say he feels frightened, but he did that night. Where it come from, I don't know. But, these are just all things that, whether we'll ever get the answers to it, Paul, I really don't know. But we've got to keep moving forward and trying, haven't we?
Absolutely. And I think one of the frustrating things, but also I think it gives it a bit more credence as well, is that they seem to dissipate, Paul. You can do it the day after and there's nothing there.
It's not there, yeah. It's kind of transient, isn't it? But certain areas seem like they can produce that effect, and we've noted that we actually think that whatever it is particularly up there, is dark in nature. And we've noted that if we put EMF meters on, and we make sure they're away from phones and everything, we'll put them on a monopod in a field 30 foot away. You still see it lit up, and it'll just remain a green light, and there might be 2 or 3 on, and nothing happens. You can be talking for an hour, and then let's say Pete, I blame Pete, a bit of dark humour comes up, something that I won't talk about on here, but a bit of dark humour comes up and people have a little chuckle, and these things are going off. And we've noted there's a relationship with that kind of talk and these things activating, which is interesting in itself, And I don't think we're imagining it. I mean, we put a shot on on Truth Proof, and I walked around the Cliftops late at night with Mick Park. We put the camera equipment and the phones away because there's nobody up there. Nobody's going to come up and take your gear. And I've got the EMF meter, and I'm walking down, and I'm a mixed distance away, filming me, and I'm asking it questions, and it's reacting. And then I said, "Can you stop now, please?" 2 seconds, it just stops. Carry on walking, ask it to start again, and it starts. Now, I realise that some people listening to this going, "Well, where's this proof?" Go on to Truth Proof. Go on to the Truth Proof YouTube channel. I don't know what it's called, but it's one that's to do with incredible EMF results or something, words to that effect, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I don't know what it's proof of. Do you know what I mean? But it was happening. I think a lot of people now are coming around to the fact that a lot of this is linked. So, your typical UFO researcher, hopefully, is not stuck in the box of UFOs and realises there might be a connection to other things as well. I think that's the only way forward, because I think we can take things from all genres of the research. I mean, I'm not particularly into ghosts and mediums, but that doesn't mean that they're into place for it. It's just not. It doesn't interest me as much as the other parts of it, but I think there's a massive place for it. And I think as a whole, probably researchers and interested parties are far more interested in ghosts and hauntings than they are cryptids. I just think we've got, it all has a part to play.
Oh, very much so. I think you can apply investigative disciplines to all phenomena, Paul, and I think sometimes people tend to hang their hat on certain things, like it's concrete proof of it. But often I think, I've seen you and Bob up there, I've seen your kit, I've seen what you've done, you explain things to me. I've got a fair bit of knowledge in regards to a lot of this tech that some people use. I think a lot of people, especially when it comes to ghosts and hauntings, are just using stuff and they don't really know what it's reporting. But for them, if they get a positive response, it's the proof. Yeah. But what is it proof of? You've got to validate things. And I think one of the things that's always struck me about you is you're the first to say when something isn't right or it ain't working, or it's not happening in that manner. Like you were saying about the EMF stuff, because people would say, oh, well, there's clearly some kind of frequency leakage there. Yeah. Which we know EMF can cause feelings of disorientation, even in some extreme cases allegedly can cause hallucinations. But I'd like to see the data and the correlation that can prove that conclusively for me. So there's clearly something that can have, as with anything, different things can affect people differently. Microwaves can affect people differently. There's all kinds of things. Everybody's genetic makeup is different, Paul. We all react to stuff. That's why some people are allergic to things and some aren't. It's just...
You're right. And allergies and things like that, I can get that. But I would have thought a reaction to a frequency, because we're all sort of biologically the same, aren't we? Yes. We're all made up of the same percentage of water and blood, just about. But so I think there's something happening to the human being when they're in close contact to these things. But you're talking about equipment. We started using thermal cameras a few years ago. Quite good ones, pulsar thermals, and I'm not sure that Ian's using, but it's a good thermal camera. And we're seeing things on thermal, and I don't mean regularly, but we've caught things on thermal in close proximity to us. Really, really good footage, and I'll just jump on that before we kind of close down, but because I want to just talk about it. But it makes you wonder, if you get too close to them, if the effects of what these things are giving off are creating these feelings of fear. Yeah. Because we wouldn't have seen it without a thermal camera, and it were totally silent. Yet it's there. Well, I've got one that's just like a glowing rectangle on the side of the cliff, just over the edge of the cliff. And it's really strange. Ian's captured one that's like a football about 200 yards away, and it's just like a beach ball, not a football. It's a sphere that's just oscillating and changing. It's an incredible piece of footage. In fact, I did Ian's presentation. I put it all together for him, and he spoke at the Awakening, and I put this bit of footage in. And people were coming up, and the guy who does a lot of work for Linda Moulton Howe came up and said that's the best bit of footage he's ever seen in his life. A lot of people were saying it. It's incredible. So, so just to dwell on footage, just for a moment, we're putting together all of this footage because this is no slur on the UFO researchers and the people who've collected footage, but I think for the last at least 2 years, we've seen revelations on the internet of incredible footage in relation to disclosure and other things. And when you look at the footage, it's not really that incredible. Yeah, but seriously, the only thing that stopped us in showing all of this footage is me. I've just not put it out there. Yeah. So we're going to put it together and start showing the world some of this footage. It's no good me talking about it and saying we've got some great footage, and not showing anybody it. So we're going to start and put the footage out. I think there'll be quite a bit of interest in it, to be honest with you. We've captured some really special stuff up on those cliff tops.
I mean, it's very similar to what strange things that Trey Hudson's caught, because he's caught some very similar things, obviously through the Meadow project. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I've seen some of it on TV and on presentations that Trey's given, and it's baffling, Paul. And like you say, is it linked to these feelings of fear that come over people, as though you could possibly think that is this fear reaction that people are having being emitted as some kind of self-defence, because it doesn't want you to know it's there, so it wants you to bugger off.
That's a possibility. And if you jump to the real extremes and you talk about the Fae, the elemental beings that are depicted in folklore, and they're not depicted as little Tinkerbell winged things, they're the Fae. So let's imagine that there's a reality to the Fae. Some people think there is. And they've lived and they're tied to the land, and they've lived in these areas for not just hundreds of years, thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
And they kind of semi-invisible cloak themselves. Nobody gets to see them. So you get a group of people coming in, lighting fires, throwing rubbish about, ripping trees up, chopping trees down. And these things, if you read the literature and what this is supposed to be able to do is in shapeshift and appear as other things, if they appeared as something like a werewolf stroke dogman, what would you do? You'd leave the area, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's what's happening, but I think it's a fascinating thought that maybe the Fae are, pardon the pun, the ancient aliens and the aliens of today. They could be responsible for, if there's a reality to what people call the Fae, then they could be responsible for what a lot of people are seeing. Yeah, all ideas and thoughts that will just sort of throw these hooks out, because somebody might just come back to you, Paul, or to me, said, when you talked about that, this is my thoughts on that. And you think, bloody hell, that's added another piece to the puzzle. And everybody's input is worth listening to, unless you're going to say it's all a load of rubbish. And then I don't want to know.
Well, it is. And I think it's good to have views that might sometimes challenge what we believe, Paul. I think often, as we've spoken before, buddy, I think what we thought 10 years ago compared to what we think now are very different things. And I think that's down to reading, researching, speaking with other people, cross-examining different reports from different areas and looking at some of the similarities, but also noticing key differences, I think, sometimes. Yeah. And I think often some people will have a cast iron explanation for whatever their preferred phenomena is. And I think sometimes if you have one set of principles, it becomes very apparent very quickly that doesn't apply in certain cases. And you've got to be able to, you've got to be malleable in your research and your ability to understand things.
Change, and accept and not say my mind's made up, so I'm not changing it. You've got to be prepared to realise that you could be wrong. I mean, everything and nothing and everything I've just spoken about and you've spoken about today, we could be way off the mark, and somebody could come and say, look, this is how it is. I want you to listen to this, or this is how I believe it is. Usually if a person comes to me and says, I'm going to tell you what it is, that's the fastest way to get me to switch off, because I don't know, and very invariably the person that's going to tell you doesn't know. But the experience that he or she has had may have shaped that belief, and it may have been so profound for them that they're not going to change their mind. So you've got to respect that a little bit as well. But, our research, if that's what it is, up there in that location and all the other places around East and North Yorkshire has changed, definitely. Gone are the days where me and Steve Ashbridge would go up onto the Wolds or go up to North Yorkshire and kind of just stare with his mouth open, looking at the sky, hoping to see some unusual light.
Yeah.
It's all around you. Whatever this phenomena is, it can kind of strike at any time. So when we go to these locations, we're aware that things can happen. I were up there, me, Pete, Linny, and I don't know who else were up there, probably just after Christmas. It's got to have been before Pete had his operation, so it might be just before. And Pete stood about 5 foot away from me, and we're overlooking the sea, looking down towards Flamborough. Linny's talking to somebody behind us. And we just stood there in the darkness, and a voice went, and he's from Barnsley, is Pete. He's been in 30-odd years, so you'll know what I'm going to say next. So anyway, a voice went, "Paul." And I looked at Pete and he went, "Did they hear that?" I said, "Yeah, I did." He said the name, didn't he? And a voice just out of the ether said Paul. Yeah, and we both heard it. Yeah, but, a great bloke, Pete, to be honest with you. But, it's all thee and thou with Pete. That's just as it is. So, I mean, people probably have a problem understanding some of the things I say. I've noted on podcasts and when we put things out, say we can't really understand him, and it's just Yorkshire, isn't it? You can't cater for everybody, and the Americans sometimes say it, but then I think, but if we were listening to somebody from the deep south, we might struggle to understand them. Yeah. Just got to try a little bit harder. But that's where we're at. Absolutely.
Well, listen, before I let you go, Paul, obviously you've been filming for the best part of nearly 2 years again, because obviously we've got another Wolflands documentary coming on after the success of the first one, as well as continuing to do that. So how's that going, and has that taken you outside of where Wolflands, the sort of prism of experiences was for that film?
Well, Wolflands primarily it was set in the forests and around woodlands, didn't really encroach on suburbia, but I realised that there's things people are seeing and experiencing in their own homes and around their own homes. So we've interviewed witnesses, and we're incorporating some of that in the new Wolflands. It won't be called Wolflands, I'm pretty sure, but that's just kind of a working title. And it's only going slow. It's not Les, it's me. And it's not because I don't want to, but we've got so much on at the moment. There's so many things. I'm getting up on a morning, and I don't mean I'm getting 30 emails, but I've got emails, 4 or 5 emails sometimes. Sometimes there's only 2. But out of decency, some of them are really, really interesting. So you want to reply and give a decent reply. You don't mean that the others that aren't interested, you don't reply, but there's some that are just saying, "Oh, I watched Wolflands and I really enjoyed it," and you just have to, thank you very much and thanks for support. But you imagine if you've got 3 or 4 emails that you've got to give a 20-minute reply to in the morning, that eats into your time. Then you look on social media. These aren't complaints, but time. I have to look at things now and think, my phone's ringing and I can see who that is, but I know that's going to cost me half an hour of my time and I won't get that done. Yeah. And I'm sure we all do it, and I'll ring them later and I'll text and say, busy. But I'm sure we all do these things, but time seems to be something I've not got loads of at the moment. And so Wolflands 2 is not suffering, but we've been slower with it because I'm doing another documentary with Chris Turner.
Yes.
And me and Chris have been doing the same, and that's time for Chris and it's time for me. And that's going to be quite interesting. I did some work for Blaze TV, a little bit. Then I did some for Ancient Aliens, which didn't take a lot of time up, I'll be honest with you. That didn't take loads of time up, and they'd asked me quite a few times in past, and I don't mean I'd turned them down. It just circumstance, it just didn't work. But I've done a bit recently. But I'm such as your podcast, Mysteries and Monsters, and please tell me I've got the name right. No, I know that. No, but such as your podcast, I mean, I need to devote time because you guys have, Paul, you've always had time for me, and there's loads and loads of podcasts that I'll do it later, because I got saturated with them, say, 2017 to about 2020. I were doing loads and loads and loads. And I'm thinking, I'm just churning the same stuff out here.
Yeah.
I know there's some people make a living at conferences and everything, not a living as such, but they do the circuit and they just talk about the same thing over and over again. I like to mix it up a little bit, and just entertaining people's minds a little bit more than just talking about. We touched on Hummonby, but I don't think people would want to hear Hummonby every time Paul comes on Mysteries and Monsters. They want to hear Hummonby from start to finish, or things from Night People. Do you know what I mean? It's nice to just mix it up. So I've been doing a few more of these podcasts, and I want to continue and just keep doing what we're doing, and just getting the word out about the research, about where they can obtain the books if they want them, and all that kind of thing, But can I send you some links?
Of course you can.
Yeah. That would be good.
You send me anything you want me to promote, mate.
Obviously, I do the Truth Proof live streams on a Thursday and a Sunday, but I'm also doing the Last Transmission live stream on a Tuesday. So that's a 2-hour one. Yeah. The Last Transmission. There's a cup. And I'm doing that with Chris Turner. It doesn't seem to be spoiling anything that we're doing for Truth Proof, although sometimes I think 2 hours is too much, to be honest with you. Not that the people who are listening, they're not great, but sometimes it's just time. 2 hours is a long time, isn't it, to devote? I mean, you're doing these podcasts, and yours probably run for what, an hour to an hour and a half?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So listen, Paul, as we've said, where can everybody follow your brilliant live stream, see your interviews, see your video updates, and also get hold of your books, my friend?
So the books, they're on the website, truthproof.uk, if you want the paperback versions. If you're going to order them overseas, use the Amazon link on there, then they can go through global shipping, and it don't cost any more than UK postage for me. That's the main thing. The DVD, hard copy, if you wanted one of them, truthproof.uk, and the same procedure if they're going overseas. Mm-hmm. The Kindle versions of the books are on Amazon via download, and this is on Amazon Prime. And I want to get cover changed because I think cover looks too cartoonish. But we started with that, and it's my fault, not Les's. Jason, who did the cover for Night People, did me this, and I just don't think it quite... I like what Jason's done, I think that's great, but it don't quite fit with the narrative of Wolflands, which is quite a scary documentary when you get into it, what the people have seen and experienced. And as I say, then the live streams themselves, Tuesdays and Thursdays... Tuesdays for the Last Transmission, Thursdays and Sundays for the Truth Proof live streams. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Paul. Thank you.
As always, my friend, as you said very kindly, you've always struck me as a very humble man in regards to what you do in your research, but you always make time for me as well, mate. It's a mutual appreciation society here. We've got to know each other very well over the last 6 or 7 years, and I know how busy you are, and obviously even as someone who devotes themselves full time to this, sometimes you just don't have enough hours in the day, my man. So I always appreciate you moving things around to fit me in. So thank you again. No,
you're welcome. You're welcome. And anybody that wants to get in touch with me based on what we've spoken about, Paul Sinclair, ilf@gmail.com.
Absolutely. I'll put links to everything in the show notes and how they can get you. And once again, thank you, my friend. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.